Guys, my voice might sound a little weird in today's review because I've had a cold for the past 4 days and I'm not letting that keep me from making more content and doing more reviews. So, on to the topic at hand. Our good friends over at Kemco have released another RPG for handhelds, a much more recent one than the previous games I've reviewed for them. More of a slice of life atelier type game. Here is my review of Marenian Tavern story, Patty and the Hungry God for the Nintendo Switch. Marenian Tavern story, or MTS, is centered around a young girl named Patty and her little brother, children to a very famous tavern/restaurant. Living the good life, they run into a bit of bad luck when they become possessed by the god of poverty, becoming poor and losing everything they ever knew. Patty then starts from scratch, making her own tavern and building it up, while also cooking and feeding the god of poverty to get rid of their possession. Now this is a silly little slice of life story. It is an RPG, but it's more like Atelier like I mentioned in the intro. There's no big world-ending threat or anything. You're just trying to build up a tavern for Patty and her family to be able to live and make a name for themselves. Well, I would say that, but there is one problem with the story. Everything really builds up and leads to a very, very good conclusive ending. But right as soon as that ending happens, instead of ending, the game keeps going and completely deviates from the tone of the game to have a more RPG-like ending. When we go into gameplay, Marenian Tavern story is kind of like a cross between a turn-based RPG and a cooking simulator. Your basic goal in the game is to collect ingredients and cook them into dishes to sell at your tavern, but the acquisition of those ingredients often requires you to go into dungeons and take part in turn-based battles. The way this game handles progression is that every chapter is a rank in your tavern. To get to the game's ending, you need a 5-star restaurant, and that requires a lot of ranks. Each rank has 3 different requirements: total sales during that period, how full the god of poverty is from the dishes that you feed him, and completing new story missions, mostly requiring you to go through dungeons and fighting bosses. Now this is a pretty simple process, especially at the beginning portions of the game. You gather your ingredients by buying them from shops or going out into dungeons, harvesting from harvest points or getting them as drops from battle. Then you come back to the tavern at the end of the day, cook them all up into delicious meals, and sort them out for which ones you want to sell that day and which ones you want to feed to the god of poverty. Well, it's got a little more planning than that, because you also use your cooked meals to level up your characters. You don't get any experience from fighting enemies. All you get from them are ingredients. So if you want to level up your characters to take on the next dungeon, you gotta take some of your selling and god-feeding dishes and feed them to your characters instead. And considering how many ingredients a lot of the recipes call for, it's not like you're gonna just go on one little dungeon track, go back and have tons and tons and tons of dishes to rearrange between your 3 little slots, especially considering you can only go to 1 dungeon per day. Dividing up all of those resources is gonna make the game a little grindy, though really, the game is very grindy and very repetitive even without dividing up resources. For each rank up, it doesn't really take that much to fill up the god of poverty's fullness gauge, or level up your characters enough to do your dungeons. The majority of your work in the game is gonna go to getting those sales, because every single rank up I spent so long to meet those sales numbers. And they kept going up, even when you make high tier dishes. It's not how much you're selling, it's just how massive the requirements are. When I got towards the last few chapters of the game, to keep each chapter from not being hours upon hours upon hours, I had to completely minimize my dungeon crawling and opting to just buying all my ingredients and shoving out those dishes as fast as I could, so the last few hours of the game didn't take as long as the entire game before then. And speaking of length, let's talk about how long you'll be spending on this game. Considering how efficiently I played the last few chapters, I ended up reaching the final boss and getting clear data in around 20 hours. Now once you get your clear data, there's not really that much more for you to do. There's no new game plus, And the post-game really just boils down to a couple 3 or 4 minute story quests, and the game just letting you keep doing what you're doing, gathering, cooking, and building up your characters. Now let's dive into presentation. When it comes to graphics, this is another one of those, hey, let's combine 2D with 3D in our graphics engine RPGs. You've got 2D SNES style renders for all of the characters, while the environments have a very smoothed out 3D look to them. Now this does have a unique style to it, but when you've got it in handheld mode, the 2D renders really make the 3D textures look blurry, and honestly, it's really hard on the eyes. Now when it comes to performance, I don't really have any problems with it. The game never crashed on me, I never saw the frames drop, everything runs smooth and very stable. Next, let's get into battery life. Being a 2D RPG from Kemco, I expected great battery life, and I got great battery life. Marenian Tavern story has a battery range of 4 hours and 54 minutes on high settings, up to 5 hours and 59 minutes on low settings. 5 to 6 hours. Very impressive as always. Now, in conclusion, Marenian Tavern Story is a nice little slice of life RPG that really deviates from what Kemco usually throws at us on handhelds. Now, it is brought down by a lot of little small issues like the sudden final boss fight in the story mode and the significant repetition of the tavern sales progression. But if you like gathering and synthesizing RPGs, you should definitely check this one out. Reviews to Go rates Marenian Tavern Story for the Nintendo Switch a 7.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or head to the website at reviewstogo.com.